The hay beneath her boots shifted, and Adelaide Thorne froze mid-step, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip as golden dust motes danced in the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the cracks in his barn's hayloft. His cattle ranch outside Laredo, Texas, had been his sanctuary for the past 5 years, a place where the only surprises came from ornery steers and the occasional rattlesnake, not from mysterious sounds in his barn on this warm September day in 1876. He climbed the wooden ladder slowly, each rung creaking under his weight, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sounds grew clearer now, shallow breathing that someone was trying desperately to quiet. Adelaide reached the top and pulled himself onto the loft floor, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer light as he scanned the scattered hay bales. "I know you're up here," he said, keeping his voice steady and calm. "Best come out now before this gets complicated." A long moment of silence stretched between them before a small, dirt-smudged hand emerged from behind the largest stack of hay in the far corner. Then a face appeared, pale except for the grime and sweat coating it, framed by tangled dark hair that might have been beautiful if it had seen a brush in the last week. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, wide and terrified, and Adelaide felt his chest tighten at the raw fear he saw there. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and cracking. "Please don't send me back." Adelaide slowly removed his hand from his pistol, raising both palms in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you, miss, but you're going to have to tell me what you're doing in my barn." The woman emerged slowly from her hiding spot, and Adelaide could see she was young, probably no more than 20 or 21, wearing a torn calico dress that had once been blue but was now stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood on the sleeve. She was thin, too thin, and swayed slightly on her feet as if standing took more effort than she could spare. "I needed somewhere safe," she said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the day. "I've been running for 3 days. I saw your barn and I just needed to rest for a few hours before moving on. I swear I was going to leave before you noticed." 3 days. Adelaide moved closer, concern overriding caution. "When did you last eat?" She opened her mouth to answer, but her eyes rolled back, and Adelaide lunged forward just in time to catch her as her legs gave out. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, all sharp angles and trembling exhaustion. He cursed under his breath and carefully made his way down the ladder, cradling her against his chest. The September heat hit them as he carried her across the dusty yard to his small ranch house. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was clean and sturdy, and right now it had food and water, which this woman desperately needed. He kicked open the door and carried her to his bed, the only real bed in the house, and laid her down gently on the faded quilt his mother had made before she passed. Adelaide lit the lamp on the bedside table even though sunset was still an hour away, wanting to get a better look at her condition. Up close, he could see bruises on her wrists, yellow and green and fading, but evidence of someone having grabbed her hard. Her breathing was shallow and her skin was hot to the touch. Fever, exhaustion, dehydration, possibly all 3. He went to the kitchen and pumped water into a basin, grabbed clean cloths from his cupboard, and returned to find her stirring, her eyes fluttering open with confusion. "Where am I?" she asked, trying to sit up, panic flooding her features. "Easy now," Adelaide said, gently pressing her shoulder back down. "You're in my house. You fainted. I'm going to clean you up a bit and get some water in you, then you're going to tell me what kind of trouble you're running from." "I can't stay here," she protested, but her body betrayed her words, too weak to resist as he carefully began wiping the dirt from her face with a damp cloth. "You're not going anywhere until you can stand without falling over," he said firmly. "Now, let's start with something simple. What's your name?" She hesitated, studying his face as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she finally answered, "Ophelia. Ophelia Lawrence." "Adelaide Thorne," he replied, offering her a slight smile. "Most folks call me Addie, though I'd prefer if you didn't. Now, Ophelia, I'm going to get you some water and some broth. You're going to drink both, and then you're going to rest. After that, we'll talk about whatever it is that's got you so scared." He didn't wait for her agreement, just went back to the kitchen and ladled some of the beef broth he'd made the day before into a bowl. He'd been planning on having it for supper, but this woman needed it more than he did. When he returned to the bedroom, she was struggling to sit up against the headboard, her jaw set with determination despite the way her arms shook with the effort. "Stubborn," he observed, setting the bowl and a cup of water on the bedside table. "That's probably what kept you alive these past 3 days." "That and pure spite," Ophelia said, accepting the water he handed her. She drank it too quickly, and he had to take it away before she made herself sick. "Slow down," he said gently. "You'll just bring it back up if you rush it." She nodded, accepting the bowl of broth he offered next. This she sipped more carefully, and he watched as color slowly began to return to her cheeks. After a few minutes of silence, she set the half-empty bowl aside and met his eyes. "I was supposed to get married," she said quietly. "To Marcus Fielding, a man my father chose. A man with money and influence and a mean streak wider than the Rio Grande. I said no. My father said I didn't have a choice. So 3 nights ago, the night before the wedding, I climbed out my bedroom window and I ran." Adelaide settled into the chair by the bed, processing this information. He knew the Fielding name. Marcus Fielding owned half the businesses in Laredo and had political aspirations that reached all the way to Austin. He was also known for his temper and his treatment of those he considered beneath him, which was pretty much everyone. "Your father, what's his name?" "Benjamin Lawrence," she said, and Adelaide let out a low whistle, "the banker." "Yes." Ophelia's voice was bitter. "He arranged the whole thing like I was property to be bartered. Marcus wanted a respectable wife from a good family, and my father wanted Marcus's money and connections. What I wanted never entered into the discussion. And the bruises on your wrists," she looked down at them, her jaw tightening. "Marcus didn't appreciate me refusing him. He thought he could convince me to be more cooperative. He was wrong." Adelaide felt anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp. He'd seen his share of rough men in his 32 years, had dealt with plenty who thought might made right, but he'd never understood men who used their strength against women. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "They're probably searching for you, but my ranch is small and out of the way. Most folks in town barely remember I exist, which is how I like it." "Why are you helping me?" Ophelia asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "You don't know me. This could bring you trouble." Adelaide stood and moved to the window, looking out at his small spread. 24 head of cattle, a few horses, and more land than he could properly work alone. But it was his, and he'd built it with his own hands after leaving the army. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because no one should be forced into marriage, especially not to a man who leaves bruises as calling cards. You rest now. We'll figure out the details tomorrow." He left the room, pulling the door mostly closed behind him, and set about making his own supper. The evening chores still needed doing. Cattle to check on, horses to feed. But he found his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in his bed, to her storm-gray eyes and the steel in her voice when she'd said she'd run. He'd always figured he'd live out his days alone on this ranch. After what he'd seen during the war, the violence and the waste of it all, he'd lost his taste for complications. He'd come to Lerdo, bought this land with his army pay, and built a simple life that required little from others and gave them little reason to bother him in return. But now, Ophelia Lawrence was in his house, bringing with her the kind of trouble that didn't go away quietly, and Adelaide found he didn't mind as much as he should have. There was something about her spirit, the way she'd fought her way free of a life that would have smothered her, that resonated with something deep in his chest. He did his evening chores by lantern light, checking on each of his cattle, making sure water troughs were full and the fence lines were secure. The work was familiar and soothing, and it gave him time to think. If Marcus Fielding and Benjamin Lawrence were looking for Ophelia, and they surely were, they'd start with the obvious places. Friends, relatives, nearby towns with stage connections. A small cattle ranch several miles outside of town wouldn't be high on their list, at least not at first. But eventually, they'd expand their search. Eventually, someone might remember seeing a young woman heading in this direction, or might notice Adelaide making unusual purchases in town, buying supplies for two instead of one. He'd have to be careful, strategic, if he was going to keep her safe. The question was, safe for how long? She couldn't hide in his house forever, and she couldn't leave until she had somewhere to go. Somewhere her father and Marcus Fielding couldn't find her. When he returned to the house, full dark had settled over the ranch. He checked on Ophelia and found her sleeping, her breathing deeper and more regular than before. Good. Sleep and food would do more for her than anything else right now. He took a blanket from the chest at the foot of the bed and settled himself on the floor of the front room, his back against the wall and his pistol within easy reach. Sleep came in fits and starts, his instincts too honed from his army days to fully relax with a stranger in his house and potential trouble on the horizon. Every sound outside had him tensing, listening for the approach of horses or the creak of boots on his porch. But the night passed quietly, and when dawn light began filtering through the windows, he rose and started coffee, the familiar routine grounding him. Ophelia emerged from the bedroom about an hour after sunrise, moving slowly but under her own power. She'd managed to smooth her hair back and wash her face with water from the pitcher he'd left on the washstand, though she was still wearing the torn and stained calico dress. "Morning," Adelaide said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a horse and then left in the sun to dry out," she said, but there was a hint of humor in her voice that hadn't been there the night before. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "But alive, which is better than I expected 3 days ago." He'd made bacon and biscuits, simple fare but filling, and they ate together at his small table while morning light gradually filled the room. Ophelia ate slowly but steadily, and Adelaide was pleased to see more color in her cheeks, more strength in her movements. "I've been thinking," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "You can't go back to Lerdo and you can't stay here indefinitely without people starting to notice. Do you have family elsewhere, friends who might take you in?" Ophelia shook her head. "My mother died when I was 12. I have an aunt in San Antonio, but that's the first place my father would look. And my friends," she laughed bitterly. "The women I thought were my friends all told me I was fortunate to catch Marcus's attention. They didn't understand why I'd want to refuse such an advantageous match." "What do you want?" Adelaide asked. "If you could go anywhere, do anything, what would you choose?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup as if it might hold answers. "I used to dream about having a ranch," she said finally. "Nothing grand, just a small place with some animals, maybe a garden. Somewhere quiet where I could build something of my own, make my own choices. It sounds foolish now." Doesn't sound foolish at all, Adelaide said. Sounds practical. A woman who can run a ranch can take care of herself, doesn't need to depend on anyone else for her survival. But it's impossible, Ophelia said. A woman can't just buy land and start ranching. Even if I had the money, which I don't, no one would sell to me. And I have none of the skills I'd need. I can embroider and play the piano and pour tea at social gatherings, all the useless accomplishments my father paid for me to learn. Adelaide stood and began clearing the breakfast dishes, an idea forming in his mind. It was crazy, the kind of idea that only made sense in the clear light of dawn when anything seemed possible, but the more he thought about it, the more right it felt. I could teach you, he said, keeping his voice casual. Ranching, I mean. You're already here, and it would give you something to do while we figure out a more permanent solution. At the very least, you'd have skills you could use wherever you end up. Ophelia looked up at him, surprise and something that might have been hope flickering across her face. You'd do that? Why? Because I could use the help, he said honestly. This place is bigger than one man can properly manage alone, and I can't afford to pay a ranch hand. And because you deserve a chance to learn how to build the life you want instead of the life someone else chose for you. She stood, moving to the window, and looked out at his land. The morning sun painted everything golden, catching on the dew still clinging to the grass, and Adelaide found himself seeing his ranch through her eyes. It wasn't much compared to the grand houses in Lerdo, but it was honest and earned and completely his own. I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Ophelia said quietly. Marcus isn't the kind of man who accepts defeat gracefully. If he finds me here, then we'll deal with it, Adelaide interrupted. But we're not going to spend our time worrying about what might happen. We're going to focus on what is happening, and right now, that's you getting your strength back and learning how to handle ranch life. The rest will sort itself out. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd found her in his hayloft, she smiled. It transformed her face, chasing away the fear and exhaustion and revealing the beautiful, vital woman beneath. All right, she said. Teach me. They started that very morning, after Adelaide found her some of his old clothes to wear. The pants were too long and had to be rolled up. The shirt hung loose on her frame, but they were practical and sturdy and much better suited for ranch work than her torn dress. She braided her long, dark hair back from her face, and standing there in the morning light looking determined and a little nervous, Adelaide felt something shift in his chest, some locked door swinging open for the first time in years. He pushed the feeling aside and focused on the task at hand. They started with the horses, teaching her how to approach them, how to read their body language, how to properly saddle and bridle. Ophelia was a quick study, listening intently to his instructions and asking thoughtful questions. She had a gentle touch with the animals and showed no fear, even when his gelding, a large bay named Copper, tossed his head and stamped impatiently. Good, Adelaide said, watching her smooth her hand down Copper's neck. You're a natural. My father had horses, she said, adjusting the bridle strap. For his carriage, not for riding, but I used to sneak into the stable and talk to them when I was young. The groom would let me brush them sometimes before father found out and forbade it. He said it wasn't proper for a young lady. Seems like your father had strong opinions about what was proper for you, Adelaide observed, unable to keep the edge from his voice. He had strong opinions about everything, Ophelia replied, especially after Mother died. It was like he couldn't bear the reminder of her, so he tried to mold me into something else entirely, something acceptable to Lerdo society. But I never quite fit the shape he wanted. They moved on to the cattle next, and Adelaide showed her how to check them for injury or illness, how to recognize signs of distress, how to move among them without spooking the herd. The work was hot and dusty, and by midday Ophelia's face was flushed and sweat dampened, but she never complained or asked to stop. They broke for lunch in the shade of the barn, sharing water from the pump and cold biscuits left over from breakfast. Ophelia sat on the ground with her back against the barn wall, her borrowed hat tipped back, looking more relaxed than she had since he'd found her. "This is good," she said, gazing out at the cattle grazing in the near pasture. "This feels real in a way my life in Laredo never did." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Adelaide said, settling beside her. "That's why I came out here. After the war, I couldn't stomach the falseness of town life, everyone pretending things were fine when they weren't, putting on airs and keeping up appearances. Out here, things are what they are. A good day's work is a good day's work, and you can see the results of your labor right in front of you." "You were in the war?" Ophelia asked, then immediately looked apologetic. "I'm sorry, that's probably not something you want to talk about." "It's all right," Adelaide said, though the memories still carried weight. "I served with the Texas Cavalry for 3 years. Saw more death than any man should, learned that the reasons we thought we were fighting for didn't match up with the reality of what we were doing. When it was over, I just wanted somewhere quiet to build something instead of tearing things down." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Ophelia spoke again. "Can I ask you something? Why haven't you married? Built a family out here?" Adelaide was quiet, considering his answer. "Thought about it a few times, but never met anyone who understood why I needed this life. The women in town see a small ranch and think it's a stepping stone to something bigger, something more respectable. They don't understand that this is what I want, that I'm not trying to become someone else. After a while, I stopped looking." "That seems lonely," Ophelia said softly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's honest loneliness, if that makes sense, better than being with someone and still feeling alone." They returned to work after lunch, and Adelaide taught her about mending fences, showing her how to properly string wire and secure posts. She caught her hand on a barb and cursed with surprising creativity, making Adelaide laugh. "Where did a banker's daughter learn language like that?" he asked, wrapping her hand with a clean cloth from his pocket. "The groom who used to let me brush the horses," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "He was old and didn't care much about corrupting my delicate sensibilities. Best conversations I had as a child were in that stable." As the afternoon wore on, Adelaide found himself watching her more than he probably should, noticing the way she bit her lip in concentration, the graceful efficiency of her movements once she learned a task, the stubborn set of her jaw when something proved difficult. She worked with a focus and determination that spoke of someone trying to prove something, maybe to him but more likely to herself. By the time evening rolled around, they were both tired and filthy, but Ophelia looked satisfied in a way he suspected she rarely had in her previous life. They walked back to the house together, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Adelaide realized he was in serious trouble. One day. She'd been here barely 1 day, and already his quiet, solitary life felt different, fuller, like a house that had been missing furniture without him realizing it. He told himself it was just the novelty of having company, of having someone to talk to besides his horses and cattle, but he knew that wasn't the whole truth. "I'll heat water for washing up," he said, needing something practical to focus on. "There's enough for both of us if we're careful about it." Ophelia helped him carry and heat the water, and they took turns washing off the day's dirt in the privacy of the bedroom, Adelaide staying firmly in the front room while she bathed and changed back into his other spare shirt, which served as a nightdress. He made dinner, beans and bacon with some vegetables from his small garden, and they ate by lamplight, talking about the next day's work and what else she needed to learn. It felt domestic and comfortable in a way that should have alarmed him but didn't. "Thank you," Ophelia said as they finished eating, "for today, for all of this. I can't remember the last time I felt useful, like I was building towards something instead of just waiting for my life to happen to me." "You did good today," Adelaide said honestly. "Better than most folks would on their first try at ranch work. You should be proud." She smiled, that same transforming smile from the morning, and Adelaide felt that unlocked door in his chest swing open a little wider. That night he took his blanket to the floor again, but before she disappeared into the bedroom, Ophelia paused. "Adelaide," she said softly, "you can sleep in your own bed, I can take the floor." "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "You're my guest and you're still recovering your strength." "The floor's fine for me." "Then at least take some proper bedding," she insisted. "There's extra blankets in the chest." It was a small kindness, but it warmed him more than it probably should. He accepted the extra blankets she brought him, their fingers brushing briefly as he took them, and tried not to notice the way his heart jumped at the contact. The second day followed a similar pattern to the first. They rose with the sun, shared breakfast, and then Adelaide continued Ophelia's education in ranch work. He taught her to handle his rifle, showing her how to properly aim and fire in case she ever needed to protect herself or scare off a predator threatening the cattle. She had good instincts and a steady hand, and by the end of an hour's practice, she was hitting the target more often than not. "You're a quick learner," he observed as she successfully hit the can he'd set up on a fence post. "I'm motivated," she replied, lowering the rifle. "The thought of being able to protect myself, of not having to depend on anyone else for my safety, that's powerful motivation." They worked on the vegetable garden next, and Adelaide was surprised to learn she knew quite a bit about plants despite her sheltered upbringing. "My mother's garden," she explained, carefully pulling weeds from around the tomato plants. "Before she got sick, she spent hours out there every day. She used to tell me that growing things was the most honest work a person could do. You put care and time into the earth, and the earth gave back to you. Father had the garden destroyed after she died, said it wasn't fitting for our position, but I never forgot what she taught me." "She sounds like she was a wise woman," Adelaide said. "She was," Ophelia said softly. "She would have liked you, I think. Would have liked this place." The words hung between them, carrying implications that Adelaide wasn't quite ready to examine. He changed the subject, showing her which vegetables were ready for harvest and how to tell when the others would be. They fell into an easy rhythm over lunch, sitting in the shade again and talking about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Laredo, about the mother she'd lost, and the father who'd become a stranger. He told her about his childhood on a small farm in East Texas, about the parents he'd lost to fever before the war, about the brother who died beside him at Chickamauga. "I'm sorry," she said when he finished, her hand finding his where it rested on his knee. "That's too much loss for one person." "We all carry losses," he replied, not pulling his hand away. "The war taught me that. The question is whether we let them define us or whether we build something new from what's left." She squeezed his hand once before releasing it, and they sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The afternoon brought different work. Adelaide needed to ride out to check his fence line on the far edge of his property, and he brought Ophelia along, putting her on his gentlest mare. She rode stiffly at first, clearly unused to the saddle, but gradually relaxed as they made their way across the grassland. "It's beautiful out here," she said, looking around at the rolling landscape dotted with mesquite and live oak. "So much space and sky. In town, everything feels crowded, like there's never room to breathe." That's exactly how I felt, Adelaide said. Like I needed distance from everything just to remember who I was. They found a broken section of fence where some of his cattle had pushed through, and Adelaide set about making repairs while Ophelia watched and asked questions. He explained his system for rotating pastures, how he managed water access, his plans for gradually expanding his herd. She listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering observations that showed she was thinking about the land and its possibilities. You could run sheep on that section there, she said, pointing to a hillier area to the north. The grass looks different, more suited to sheep than cattle. Adelaide looked where she indicated and realized she was right. He'd been so focused on cattle that he hadn't considered diversifying. That's a good eye you have, he said, impressed. Have you been reading my ranching books? She flushed slightly. Last night after you fell asleep. I hope you don't mind. I found them on the shelf and started reading about land management. It's fascinating, the way everything connects, how you have to think about the whole system instead of just individual pieces. They rode back in the late afternoon, the sun warm on their backs, and Adelaide found himself stealing glances at her, at the way she sat more confidently in the saddle now, at the contentment on her face as she looked out at the land. She belonged here in a way he wouldn't have thought possible after just 2 days, like the landscape had been waiting for her to fill some empty space in it. That evening, after chores and dinner, they sat on his porch and watched the sun set, painting the western sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. Ophelia had brought out his ranching books and was reading by the last of the day's light, occasionally asking him questions about terminology or techniques. "What are you running from?" she asked suddenly, lowering the book. "Besides the obvious reasons why someone would want a quiet life. There's something else, isn't there?" Adelaide was quiet for a long moment, watching darkness creep across his land. He'd never told anyone the full truth, had kept it locked inside for 7 years, but something about her calm acceptance, her own willingness to share her pain made him want to speak. "During the war," he began slowly, "toward the end, things got desperate. There were orders that came down, orders to burn farms, to take supplies from civilians who needed them to survive, to treat anyone who wasn't actively fighting for our side as the enemy. I followed those orders for a while because I was a soldier, and that's what soldiers do. But then there was this farm, this family just trying to survive, and the orders were to burn them out, take everything they had." He paused, the memory still vivid after all these years. "I couldn't do it. I let them go, told my commanding officer they'd already fled. He didn't believe me, but he couldn't prove otherwise. After that, I was done. Did my duty until the war ended, but I knew I could never be part of something like that again, could never let someone else's orders override what I knew was right." "That took courage," Ophelia said softly. "Or cowardice," Adelaide replied. "I've never been sure which. Courage," she insisted. "Cowardice would have been following orders you knew were wrong just because it was easier than standing up for what was right. You lost something that day, didn't you? More than just your faith in the cause." "I lost my certainty," he admitted. "Lost the ability to trust that the people in charge knew what they were doing or cared about the consequences of their orders. That's what drove me out here, why I needed to be somewhere I only had to answer to myself." Ophelia reached over and took his hand, a deliberate gesture this time, not a moment of spontaneous comfort but a conscious choice. "I understand that," she said. "That need to be the one in control of your own life. That's why I couldn't marry Marcus, even though refusing him meant losing everything I'd ever known. Some things are worth running from, and some things are worth running toward." They sat like that as full dark settled, hands linked, not speaking but not needing to. Adelaide felt something settling in his chest, something that had been restless and unsettled for years finding a place to land. The third day dawned clear and hot, promising temperatures in the 90s by afternoon. Adelaide woke before sunrise as usual, but instead of being alone in the pre-dawn quiet, he found Ophelia already up, making coffee with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for years instead of days. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, stretching out the stiffness from another night on the floor. "Too much on my mind," she admitted, handing him a cup. "I've been thinking about what happens next. I can't hide here forever, Adelaide. Eventually someone will come looking, or someone in town will notice you're making larger purchases, or any of a dozen other things that will give me away." "I know," he said, because he'd been thinking the same thing. "But you're not ready yet. You need more time to build your strength, to learn enough skills that you can make a life for yourself wherever you end up. And if I don't want to leave—" The words came out quietly, almost a whisper, but they hit Adelaide like a gunshot. He set down his coffee cup very carefully, his heart suddenly pounding. "What are you saying?" Ophelia moved to stand in front of him, her storm-gray eyes meeting his directly. "I'm saying that in 2 days I've felt more alive, more myself than I have in my entire life. I'm saying that I like this work, this place. I'm saying that I like you more than I probably should after such a short time." "Ophelia," he started, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. But sometimes you just know, don't you? Sometimes you meet someone and it's like finding a piece of yourself you didn't know was missing. That's what this feels like to me, but if you don't feel the same way, if you want me to leave once I'm stronger, I'll understand. I won't make this complicated for you." Adelaide stood, closing the distance between them until he was close enough to see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, close enough to smell the soap she'd used that morning mixed with the coffee on her breath. "The first night you were here," he said slowly, "I told myself it was just novelty, just the strangeness of having company after so long alone. The second night I tried to convince myself it would pass, that once you were gone, things would go back to normal. But this morning I woke up, and the first thought I had was about you, about teaching you to rope today, about the way you laugh when one of the calves does something foolish. And I realized normal isn't what I want anymore." Her breath caught, hope and fear warring on her face. "What do you want?" "You," he said simply. "Here. If you'll have me and this simple life. I know it's not what you're used to, and I know 3 days isn't enough time to make a decision like this, but I also know that I haven't felt this sure about anything since before the war. You said sometimes you just know, and you're right. I know." She smiled, tears gathering in her eyes, and Adelaide reached up to cup her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs gently brushing away the tears that spilled over. "I don't have much to offer," he continued. "This ranch, my work, an honest life but not an easy one. But I can promise you'll always have a choice, that I'll never try to mold you into something you're not, that whatever we build here, we'll build it together as equals." "Adelaide," she whispered, and then she was kissing him, her arms coming up around his neck, and Adelaide pulled her close, feeling something fundamental shift and settle inside him. "This," his heart seemed to say, "this is what you've been waiting for." When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ophelia laughed shakily. "We're insane. We barely know each other. This is the kind of impulsive decision I should be avoiding after running away from a forced marriage." "The difference is choice," Adelaide said. "You chose to run from Marcus. You're choosing this. That's everything." "Yes," she said firmly. "I am choosing this. I'm choosing you." They stood there in his small kitchen, holding each other as dawn light gradually filled the room, and Adelaide felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. But then reality intruded, as it always did. There's still the problem of Marcus and your father, he said reluctantly. They won't stop looking, and if they find you here, there will be trouble. Legal trouble at the very least. You're technically still under your father's authority until you marry. Ophelia pulled back, her jaw setting in that stubborn way he'd come to recognize. Then we'll have to make sure I'm no longer under his authority. Adelaide's heart jumped. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying marry me, Adelaide Thorne. Today. Now. As soon as we can get into town and find someone to perform the ceremony. Once we're married, my father has no legal claim over me, and Marcus can't force anything. It solves the practical problem, and it's what I want anyway, so why wait? You deserve better than a rushed ceremony just to escape your father's authority, Adelaide protested, even as every part of him wanted to say yes. You deserve courting and romance and time to be sure. I am sure, Ophelia insisted, and we can have romance after we solve the practical problems. Isn't that what ranching teaches? Handle the necessities first, enjoy the luxuries after, Adelaide laughed despite himself. You're absolutely right, and you're going to make an excellent rancher's wife. But Ophelia, are you completely certain? Once we do this, there's no going back. I'm not Marcus Fielding with his money and connections. I'm just a man with a small ranch and calloused hands. You're the man who found me hiding in his hayloft and didn't turn me away, Ophelia said. The man who fed me and taught me and listened to me like what I had to say mattered. You're the man who showed me that my dream of having a ranch wasn't foolish, and who offered to help me build the skills I needed to live the life I wanted. You're exactly who I want, Adelaide. Exactly. He kissed her again, softer this time, trying to pour everything he felt into it. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. All right, let's get married today, but not in Lerdo. Too much chance of running into your father or Marcus. There's a small town about 20 miles south, San Ignacio. We can get married there, and by the time anyone in Lerdo hears about it, it will be done. They rode out within the hour, Adelaide on Copper and Ophelia on the gentle mare, both dressed in their best clothes, which wasn't saying much. Adelaide's good shirt was clean but worn, and Ophelia wore her mended calico dress, the only dress she had. But she'd washed it and fixed the tears, and with her hair brushed and braided, she looked beautiful. The ride to San Ignacio took them most of the morning, following dusty roads through the Texas scrubland. They talked as they rode, making plans for their future with the giddy excitement of people who'd found something unexpected and precious. We'll need to expand the garden, Ophelia said. And I was serious about the sheep. We could start with just a few, see how they do. We'll need to build another room onto the house, Adelaide added. Maybe two. Can't have you sleeping in that bedroom while I take the floor forever. She blushed but met his eyes. I suppose not. Although I wouldn't have objected to you joining me in the bed even before this. Wouldn't have been proper, Adelaide said, though the thought had certainly crossed his mind more than once. Since when do you care about proper? She teased. Since I met a woman worth being proper for, he replied, making her laugh. San Ignacio was barely more than a wide spot in the road, a handful of buildings clustered around a small church. They found the priest, Father Miguel, working in his small garden behind the rectory. He was an elderly man with kind eyes and a welcoming smile that deepened when Adelaide explained their situation, leaving out some of the more complicated details. You wish to marry today? Father Miguel asked, looking between them. This is sudden, no. We've been courting, Adelaide said, which wasn't exactly a lie if you counted the last 3 days. And we have reasons for wanting to marry quickly. Good reasons. Father Miguel studied Ophelia for a long moment, and she met his gaze steadily. Whatever he saw there satisfied him because he nodded. Love is a gift from God, and when he grants it, We should not make him wait too long for our response. Come, we will prepare. The ceremony was simple, conducted in the small church with Father Miguel's housekeeper and the local shopkeeper pulled in as witnesses. Ophelia's hand trembled slightly in Adelaide's as they spoke their vows, but her voice was strong and sure. I, Ophelia Lawrence, take you, Adelaide Thorne, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to share in your joys and your burdens, to honor the life we build together. I choose you freely and with my whole heart. Adelaide's throat tightened as he spoke his own vows. I, Adelaide Thorne, take you, Ophelia Lawrence, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you, to respect you, to value your voice and your dreams as much as my own. I promise to build a life with you based on honesty and partnership. I choose you freely and with my whole heart. They exchanged simple gold bands that Adelaide purchased from the shopkeeper, who happened to have a pair that his own parents had worn. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife and told Adelaide he could kiss his bride, he did so gently, reverently, aware that they were standing in a church, but unable to completely contain the joy rising in his chest. They signed the marriage register, Father Miguel's careful script making it official, and Adelaide made sure to get a certificate of marriage. They would need proof when word reached Lerdo, and he wanted to be sure there could be no question about the legitimacy of their union. The ride back to the ranch was slower, more relaxed now that the urgency had passed. They were married. It was done. Ophelia was no longer under her father's authority, and Marcus Fielding had no legal claim on her whatsoever. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Mrs. Thorne, Adelaide said, testing out the words. How does it feel? Strange, Ophelia admitted. But right, like a name I should have been using all along. She paused, then added with a mischievous smile, although you could call me Addie like you said people tried to call you, then we'd match. Absolutely not, Adelaide said firmly, making her laugh. They reached the ranch as the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Adelaide helped Ophelia down from her mare, and they stood for a moment just looking at the house, the barn, the cattle grazing in the distance. Our home, Ophelia said softly. I like the sound of that. Our home, Adelaide agreed, pulling her close. And our life, whatever we make it. They went inside, and Adelaide started a fire in the stove to heat water for washing up after the long, dusty ride. Ophelia set about making dinner, moving around the kitchen with increasing confidence, and Adelaide watched her, still marveling at how quickly and completely his life had transformed. 3 days ago, he'd been alone, resigned to a solitary life of hard work and simple pleasures. Now he was married to a brave, intelligent woman who looked at his modest ranch and saw possibilities, who wasn't afraid of hard work, who chose him not because she had to, but because she wanted to. After dinner, after they'd cleaned up, and the evening chores were done, they faced the question that had been hovering between them all day. They were married, but their relationship had developed so quickly that they'd barely had time to process it, let alone discuss the practical realities of sharing a life and a bed. Adelaide solved the immediate problem by pulling out extra blankets and preparing to take his usual spot on the floor of the front room, but Ophelia caught his arm. "You're my husband now," she said, blushing but determined. "We don't have to sleep separately anymore. Unless you want to wait, which I would understand, given how fast this has all happened." Adelaide set down the blankets and took both her hands in his. "I want you to feel safe here with me. I don't want you to feel rushed or pressured into anything. We have all the time in the world now." "I do feel safe," Ophelia said. "That's why I want this. Not because I think I should, but because I want to. Because you're my husband and I love you, even if it's too soon to say that after 3 days. It's not too soon, Adelaide said, his heart swelling. I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you when I saw you hiding in my hayloft, trying so hard to be brave even though you were terrified. She kissed him then, deep and long, and when they finally made their way to the bedroom, Adelaide carried her over the threshold in a gesture that was both playful and reverent. Their wedding night was tender and careful, both of them aware that they were still learning each other, still discovering how they fit together. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Ophelia curled against his side, her head on his chest and her hand resting over his heart, Adelaide felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened him. This was what he hadn't known he was missing, this sense of completeness, of coming home not to a place but to a person. "Thank you," Ophelia whispered into the darkness. "For what? For finding me. For keeping me. For giving me a life I didn't know was possible." "Thank you for choosing me," Adelaide replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "For trusting me enough to stay." They drifted off to sleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time since before the war, Adelaide slept through the night without nightmares. The next morning brought a return to routine, but everything felt different now, colored by their new relationship. They did chores together, worked side by side in the garden, checked on the cattle. Ophelia was still learning, still making mistakes, but she tackled every task with enthusiasm and determination. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt both brand new and ancient, like they'd been doing this dance forever. Ophelia proved to be a quick study at everything ranch-related, and Adelaide discovered that having a partner transformed the work from something he endured alone into something they built together. They were fixing fence one afternoon about 2 weeks after their marriage when they saw the dust cloud on the road leading to the ranch. Adelaide tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip, but Ophelia laid her hand on his arm. "It's all right," she said calmly. "We knew this was coming. Let them come." The riders resolved into 3 men as they approached: Benjamin Lawrence, Marcus Fielding, and a man Adelaide didn't recognize wearing a deputy's badge. They pulled up about 20 feet away, and the hostility radiating from Lawrence and Fielding was palpable. "Ophelia," Lawrence barked, not bothering with greetings. "Get in the wagon. We're taking you home." "I am home," Ophelia replied, moving closer to Adelaide's side. "This is my home and this is my husband. We were married 2 weeks ago in San Ignacio, legally and properly. I'm no longer under your authority, father." "Your husband." Marcus Fielding's face had gone red, veins standing out on his neck. "You can't be married to this nobody." "We had an agreement, your father and I. An agreement I never consented to," Ophelia said, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "I have the right to choose who I marry, and I chose Adelaide." "She's been coerced," Lawrence said, turning to the deputy. "This man kidnapped my daughter and forced her into marriage. I want him arrested." Adelaide reached into his pocket slowly, not wanting to spook anyone, and pulled out the marriage certificate. "If you're suggesting I forced your daughter into anything, you're welcome to ask Father Miguel in San Ignacio. He'll tell you she spoke her vows freely and clearly. He'll also tell you she signed the marriage register without any duress." The deputy rode forward and examined the certificate, then looked at Ophelia. "Madam, is this true? Did you marry this man of your own free will?" "Completely," Ophelia said firmly. "I came to this ranch of my own accord looking for shelter. Adelaide took me in, treated me with respect and kindness, and when we realized we cared for each other, we chose to marry. No one forced me to do anything." "She's lying to protect him," Marcus spat. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She's been manipulated." I know exactly what I'm saying, Ophelia shot back, anger finally bleeding into her voice. I ran away from marrying you, Marcus, because you're cruel and controlling, and the thought of spending my life with you made me physically ill. I married Adelaide because he's everything you're not: kind, respectful, honest. He treats me as an equal partner, not as property to be controlled. You little bitch, Marcus snarled, starting to dismount. Adelaide stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. I'd think very carefully before finishing that movement, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. My wife said no to you. She chose me instead. You need to accept that and ride away while you still can. The deputy moved his horse between Marcus and Adelaide. That's enough. Mr. Fielding, threatening a man's wife in front of him is a good way to get shot, and I won't have any blood shed today. He turned to Lawrence. Sir, your daughter is over 18 and married of her own free will. The law is clear on this. You have no grounds to force her to return with you. This isn't over, Lawrence said, his face twisted with fury and something that might have been shame. You've disgraced our family name, Ophelia. Don't think you can come crawling back when this little fantasy falls apart. I won't need to, Ophelia said, because this isn't a fantasy. This is my real life, finally, and I'm not giving it up for anything. The three men rode away, Marcus looking back with such malevolence that Adelaide made a mental note to be extra vigilant in the coming weeks. Men like Marcus Fielding didn't let go of their pride easily, and Adelaide had just witnessed a public humiliation that would not sit well. When they were gone and the dust had settled, Ophelia turned to Adelaide, and he saw that she was shaking, all the bravery and certainty from moments before giving way to delayed reaction. It's all right, he murmured, pulling her into his arms. You were magnificent, so strong and sure. I was terrified, she admitted, her face pressed against his chest. When I saw Marcus's face, I remembered why I ran. He looked like he wanted to kill me. He'll never touch you, Adelaide promised. I won't let anyone hurt you, Ophelia. You're safe here with me always. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other until Ophelia's shaking subsided. Then they went back to mending fence, the physical work helping to ground them both after the confrontation. That evening, Adelaide checked and double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, and made sure his rifle was loaded and within easy reach. He didn't think Marcus or Lawrence would try anything immediately, but he wasn't taking chances with Ophelia's safety. But the weeks passed without incident, and gradually they both relaxed. Fall deepened into winter, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain that turned the grasslands green. Adelaide taught Ophelia to rope cattle, and she taught him how to make proper bread, a skill she'd learned from the cook in her father's house. They worked on expanding the house, adding a proper bedroom and a small office where Ophelia kept the ranch's books and records, discovering she had a talent for organization and planning. They purchased the sheep she'd suggested, starting with a small flock of 10, and Ophelia took charge of them with the same determination she'd applied to learning everything else. Adelaide had been skeptical at first, but by spring, it was clear she'd been right. The sheep thrived on the hillier pasture and provided wool they could sell in addition to the beef from their cattle. One evening in early spring, about 6 months after their marriage, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Ophelia's head resting on Adelaide's shoulder. I've been thinking, she said, about expanding further. We have good water access, and there's that section to the east that we're not using. We could take on more cattle or maybe some horses. You said you used to train horses before the war. We could, Adelaide agreed. But are you sure you want to take on more work? You already do as much as any ranch hand I've ever known. I like the work, Ophelia said. I like building something, watching it grow, and I like doing it with you. Every day I wake up grateful that I found your hayloft, that you didn't turn me away." "Best day of my life," Adelaide said, kissing her temple. "Finding you there, even though I didn't know it at the time." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Ophelia spoke again. "Adelaide, what would you say to starting a family? Not right away necessarily, but soon." Adelaide's heart jumped, a surge of joy and terror in equal measure. "You want children?" "I do," she said, sitting up to look at him directly. "I want to fill this house with life and laughter. I want to raise children who know they're free to be themselves, who understand that their choices matter. Children we create together from this life we've built." "Then yes," Adelaide said, cupping her face in his hands. "Nothing would make me happier than raising a family with you." Time passed as it does in the country, marked by seasons and harvests rather than calendars. The ranch grew slowly but steadily under their joint management. They added more cattle, started training horses as Ophelia had suggested, expanded their sheep flock. Adelaide built a proper wool shed and Ophelia learned to card and spin, discovering yet another skill she excelled at. The first winter after their first anniversary, Ophelia told Adelaide she was pregnant. He'd been carrying water from the well and dropped the bucket in his shock and joy, water splashing everywhere, making Ophelia laugh even as happy tears streamed down her face. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling her into his arms, mindful of being gentle. "The midwife in town confirmed it yesterday," she said. "We're going to have a baby, Adelaide, a family." He kissed her then, long and deep, trying to convey everything he felt, all the love and gratitude and wonder that this was his life now. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for finding me," she replied, "for seeing me when I was at my lowest and helping me become who I was meant to be." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Adelaide became comically overprotective, insisting on doing most of the heavy ranch work himself, and trying to get Ophelia to rest more than she wanted to. She tolerated his fussing with good-natured amusement, though she continued working in the garden and managing the books until the very end. Their son was born on a cool October morning, arriving quickly, and with a healthy set of lungs that announced his presence to the entire ranch. Adelaide held him for the first time and felt something shift in his understanding of the world, felt the weight of responsibility and love so intense it was almost frightening. "What should we name him?" Ophelia asked, exhausted but glowing as she watched Adelaide with their baby. "What about Thomas?" Adelaide suggested. "After my brother, Thomas Andrew Thorne." "Thomas Andrew," Ophelia repeated, smiling. "I like that. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to your home." The baby adjusted well to ranch life, sleeping in a cradle Adelaide built and growing strong on his mother's milk. Ophelia proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but also practical, not letting motherhood stop her from continuing to work alongside Adelaide in running the ranch. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Emily Rose, named for both their mothers. She came into the world during a spring thunderstorm, her first cries mingling with the sound of rain on the roof. Thomas, now a curious toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Their family complete for the moment, they focused on teaching their children the values they held dear: honesty, hard work, kindness, the importance of making their own choices. Thomas learned to ride almost as soon as he could walk, following his father around the ranch like a devoted shadow. Emily proved to have her mother's quick mind and her father's gentle way with animals. One evening when Thomas was 5 and Emily was 3, the family sat on their expanded porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. Thomas was practicing his roping on a fence post, and Emily was playing with a lamb that had become her devoted pet. Do you ever regret it? Adelaide asked Ophelia quietly. Running away, giving up your life in Lerdo? Ophelia looked at him in surprise. Not for a single moment. Why would you ask that? Just making sure, Adelaide said, reaching for her hand. I want you to be happy, Ophelia. Always. I am happy, she said firmly. Happier than I ever imagined being. I have work that matters, children I adore, a partnership that fulfills me, and a man I love more now than I did even on the day we married. This is everything I wanted and more. Good, Adelaide said, relieved. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. You transformed everything, made my small ranch into a home, made my quiet life into an adventure. We transformed it together, Ophelia corrected. That's what partnership means. Neither of us did this alone. As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered. Adelaide and Ophelia expanded slowly and carefully, never overreaching but always looking for opportunities to improve. They hired their first ranch hand when Thomas was 7, a young man from town who needed work and proved reliable and hardworking. With extra help, they were able to take on more livestock and expand their horse training operation. Ophelia's reputation as a skilled wool producer grew, and she began selling her yarn and woven goods at markets in Lerdo and as far away as San Antonio. It amused Adelaide to no end that she became known in town as a successful businesswoman, despite having once run away from the very same social circles. She now navigated on her own terms. They occasionally ran into Benjamin Lawrence at town functions, and the encounters were always strained but civil. Lawrence had remarried a few years after Ophelia left, to a widow with social ambitions, and seemed to have moved on with his life. He never acknowledged his grandchildren when he saw them, which saddened Ophelia but didn't surprise her. Marcus Fielding had left Lerdo not long after the confrontation at the ranch, moving to Austin where his political ambitions apparently met with more success. Rumors occasionally drifted back that he'd married a senator's daughter, and Adelaide hoped whoever she was happy or at least safe. When Thomas turned 10 and Emily was 8, they had one more child, another son they named William James. His arrival was unexpected but welcomed with joy by the whole family. Thomas and Emily doted on their baby brother, and William grew up secure in the love of not just his parents but his older siblings. The ranch continued to grow, and by the time Thomas was 16 and ready to start taking on more responsibility, they'd expanded to over 200 acres with a healthy mix of cattle, horses, and sheep. Ophelia's business ventures had proven as successful as the ranching, and they'd built a small workshop where she taught other women wool processing and weaving. One evening, sitting on their porch after a long day, Adelaide and Ophelia watched their children. Thomas was teaching William to rope while Emily worked with a young horse in the corral, her patience and skill evident even at 14. "Look at what we built," Adelaide said, his arm around Ophelia's shoulders. "Not just the ranch, but them, our family." "I know," Ophelia replied, contentment in her voice. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I get to wake up every morning next to you, work alongside you, raise these incredible children with you. It's everything I dreamed of in that hayloft and so much more." "Do you remember what you told me that first day?" Adelaide asked. "When I asked what you wanted and you said you dreamed of having a ranch, somewhere you could build something of your own." "I remember," Ophelia said. "I thought it was impossible then, just a foolish dream." "But we did it," Adelaide said. "Together we made it real. This ranch, this life, it's as much yours as it is mine. More, maybe, because you're the one who brought life to it, who turned it from a lonely outpost into a home." Ophelia kissed him, soft and sweet. "We did it together," she insisted. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be, and I helped you remember how to let someone in. We built this together, every part of it." As the sun set on another day, painting the Texas sky in brilliant colors, Adelaide reflected on how profoundly his life had changed since that afternoon when he'd heard sounds in his hayloft. He'd been content enough in his solitary existence, but he hadn't known what he was missing, hadn't understood how much fuller life could be with the right person beside him. Ophelia had brought more than just her presence to his ranch. She'd brought vision and ambition, yes, but more importantly, she'd brought partnership and love, the kind of deep, abiding connection he'd thought was lost to him after the war. She'd shown him that it was possible to trust again, to open his heart again, to build something lasting and good. Years continued to roll by, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and broken equipment, all the struggles that came with ranch life. But there were also births of new calves and foals, successful harvests, children growing strong and capable, quiet evenings on the porch, and the deep satisfaction of work well done. Thomas eventually married a teacher from Lerdo, a smart, capable woman named Sarah who fit into the ranch family as if she'd always been there. They built a house on the eastern section of the property and started their own small herd, working in partnership with Adelaide and Ophelia. Their first child, a daughter they named Ophelia after her grandmother, arrived 2 years after the wedding. Emily surprised everyone by declaring she wanted to study veterinary medicine, one of the first women in Texas to pursue such a path. Adelaide and Ophelia supported her completely, proud of her ambition and determination. She went to school in San Antonio and returned to set up a practice serving the ranches around Lerdo, including her family's. William, the youngest, proved to have a gift for horse training that exceeded even his father's. By the time he was 18, trainers from across Texas were sending him their most difficult horses, and he had a reputation for patience and skill that brought significant income to the ranch. Adelaide and Ophelia grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work, but their love only deepening with time. They'd been married for over 30 years when Adelaide woke one morning to find Ophelia already up and sitting on the porch watching the sunrise. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Just thinking," she said, accepting her cup. "Do you realize it's been 32 years since I hid in your hayloft? 32 years since you found me and changed my life." 32 years since you changed mine," Adelaide corrected. "Best investment I ever made, keeping that hayloft well stocked with hay." Ophelia laughed, the sound as beautiful to him now as it had been 3 decades ago. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day? If I'd managed to slip away before you noticed?" "All the time," Adelaide admitted. "And I thank God every day that I heard you moving around up there, that I climbed that ladder, that you trusted me enough to stay. My life would have been so much emptier without you in it." "Mine would have been shorter," Ophelia said seriously. "I was at the end of my strength when I found your barn. Another day or two and I don't know if I would have made it. You saved my life, Adelaide, in every way a person can be saved." "And you saved mine," he replied. "Maybe not as dramatically, but just as completely. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving, showed me what it meant to build instead of just endure. You gave me a family, a real home, a reason to look forward to each day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint their land in shades of gold and pink, the same land they'd worked and loved for over 3 decades. In the distance, they could see Thomas heading out to check on his cattle and smoke rising from Emily's house where she lived with her husband and their 2 children. William's horses grazed in the near pasture, sleek and healthy. "We built something good here," Ophelia said softly. "Something that will last beyond us. Our children understand what this land means, what this life can give. They'll carry it forward." "They will," Adelaide agreed. "Because we taught them that land isn't just property, it's a trust. That animals aren't just assets, they're lives in our care. That family isn't just blood, it's choice and commitment and showing up for each other every day." 3 days, Ophelia mused. "I was in your hayloft for less than a day before you found me, and we were married 3 days later. Everyone thought we were insane." "We probably were," Adelaide said with a smile. "But it was the best kind of insanity. The kind that comes from recognizing what you need when you find it and having the courage to reach for it." "Would you do it again?" Ophelia asked. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would come after, would you still propose after 3 days?" "In a heartbeat," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Every challenge, every struggle, every moment of uncertainty was worth it to build this life with you. I'd do it all again exactly the same way." Ophelia leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched as their land came to life with the new day. Cattle lowing, horses nickering, the distant sound of their grandchildren's laughter carrying on the morning breeze. "I love you," she said simply. "After 32 years, through everything we've faced and built and become, I love you more now than I did when I said yes in that little church in San Ignacio." "I love you too," Adelaide replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "My brave girl who hid in my hayloft and changed everything." They sat like that as the sun climbed higher. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded both their dreams. The ranch spread out around them, thriving and productive, a testament to their hard work and partnership. Their children and grandchildren carried forward the values they'd instilled, the belief in honest work and fair dealing, in treating others with respect, in building rather than tearing down. As the years continued to advance, Adelaide and Ophelia gradually stepped back from the daily running of the ranch, trusting their children to carry on what they'd built. They spent their days together, working in the garden, training the occasional horse, teaching their grandchildren the skills and stories they wanted to pass down. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the expanded house and spilled out onto the porch. 3 generations of Thornes come together to honor the couple who'd started it all. Thomas raised a glass to toast his parents. "40 years ago, my mother made the bravest decision of her life. She ran away from a future that would have crushed her spirit, and she found her way to a hayloft on a small ranch outside Lerdo. 3 days later, she and my father were married, and everyone thought they were crazy. But they weren't crazy, they were brave. They were willing to risk everything for a chance at happiness, at partnership, at building something real together. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from that choice they made 40 years ago. To Adelaide and Ophelia Thorne, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for. To Adelaide and Ophelia. The family chorused, and Adelaide felt his eyes sting with happy tears. Later, after the party had wound down and the family had dispersed to their various homes on the expanded ranch property, Adelaide and Ophelia returned to their porch, their favorite spot, and settled into their chairs. 40 years, Adelaide marveled. Where did the time go? Into this, Ophelia said, gesturing at the land, the houses scattered across it, the legacy they'd built. Into every day we worked together, every challenge we overcame, every moment we chose each other again and again. That's where the time went, and I wouldn't change a single day of it. Not even the hard ones? Adelaide asked. The drought year when we almost lost everything. The winter William was born and got so sick we thought we'd lose him. All those times we struggled and fought to keep this place going, not even those, Ophelia said firmly. Because we faced them together, and coming through them made us stronger, made our family stronger, taught our children that life isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Adelaide thought about that day 40 years ago when he'd heard sounds in his hayloft, about the terrified young woman he'd found hiding there, about the leap of faith they'd both taken in choosing each other after 3 short days. It had been crazy, impulsive, the kind of decision that should have ended in disaster. But it hadn't, because beneath the impulsiveness had been recognition, a deep knowing that transcended logic or caution. They'd seen each other, truly seen each other, and understood that together they could build something neither could create alone. "Thank you," Adelaide said into the peaceful evening, "for trusting me, for staying, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Ophelia Thorne." "And you're the best thing that ever happened to me," Ophelia replied. "My cowboy who found me in his hayloft and gave me the world. I love you, Adelaide. Always have, always will." They remained on the porch long into the night, 2 people who defied convention and built a life based on mutual respect, hard work, and abiding love. Their ranch thrived around them, their family flourished, and the legacy they'd created would endure for generations to come. The story of the cowboy who found a woman hiding in his hayloft and proposed marriage 3 days later became a family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren as an example of courage, faith, and the transformative power of love. But for Adelaide and Ophelia, it wasn't a story or a legend. It was simply the beginning of their life together, the foundation upon which they'd built everything that mattered. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, they sat together in the home they'd made, the life they'd chosen, grateful for every moment that had brought them to this place. 40 years of marriage, of partnership, of love that had only grown deeper with time. It was everything they'd hoped for in that little church in San Ignacio, and so much more. Their legacy wasn't just the successful ranch or the thriving family, though those were significant achievements. Their real legacy was the example they'd set of what partnership could be, of how 2 people could come together and create something greater than either could have built alone. They'd shown their children and grandchildren that love wasn't just a feeling. It was a choice made new every single day, a commitment honored through actions as much as words. As they finally rose to go inside for the night, Adelaide paused and looked back at his land one more time. In the moonlight, he could see the cattle settling for sleep, the horses standing quietly in their pasture, the solid shapes of the buildings they'd constructed over 4 decades. But more than that, he could see the life they'd built, the love they'd nurtured, the family they'd raised. "Come on," Ophelia said gently, taking his hand. "Let's go to bed. Tomorrow's going to be another good day." And it was. And the day after that, and the day after that, each one a gift they didn't take for granted. They lived out their years together in the home they'd built, surrounded by the family they'd created, secure in the knowledge that they'd made the right choice all those years ago in that little church in San Ignacio. When Adelaide finally passed away at the age of 87, with Ophelia holding his hand and his children and grandchildren gathered around, his last words were simple and true. "Best investment I ever made, that hayloft." Ophelia lived another 3 years, spending her time with her family, teaching her great-grandchildren the skills she'd learned from Adelaide, passing down the stories and values that had defined their life together. When she finally joined Adelaide, she was buried beside him on a small hill overlooking the ranch, under a stone that read simply, Adelaide and Ophelia Thorne, partners in all things. The ranch continued under the management of their children and grandchildren, a thriving legacy of everything Adelaide and Ophelia had built together. On quiet evenings, family members would gather on the porch of the original house, now preserved as a monument to their grandparents, and tell the story of how it all began. Once upon a time, they would say, a cowboy found a woman hiding in his hayloft. 3 days later, he proposed marriage. Everyone thought they were crazy, but they weren't. They were brave enough to recognize love when they found it, courageous enough to reach for happiness even when it meant taking a leap of faith. And from that courage, from that choice, came everything we have today. And the children would listen, wide-eyed and wondering, to the story of their great-grandparents who'd built a legacy not just of land and livestock, but of love, partnership, and the transformative power of choosing each other every single day. It was a story that would be told for generations, a reminder that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards, and that love, real love, was worth fighting for. The ranch thrived for generations, each new custodian adding their own touches while honoring the foundation laid by Adelaide and Ophelia. But no matter how much time passed or how much the ranch evolved, the heart of it remained the same. The belief that partnership, respect, and love were the most valuable things anyone could build. And it all started with a cowboy who heard a sound in his hayloft, climbed a ladder, and found not just a woman in need of help, but his future, his partner, his love. 3 days later, they were married. 40 years after that, they were still choosing each other. And their love story became the foundation upon which generations were built, a testament to the power of courage, faith, and finding the person who makes you want to be brave.